Before we dive into this incredible story about standing up to bullies and the power of compassion, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you love real-life drama that teaches us important lessons about treating others with kindness. Picture this: I'm standing in my own front yard, watching in complete shock as Karen Williams, our neighborhood's most feared HOA president, is literally trying to drag my golden retriever Max away from me with a leash she brought from her own house. She's screaming at the top of her lungs that my dog is now HOA property because I've violated too many rules. Max is whimpering, confused and scared, pulling back toward me with those big, trusting brown eyes that seem to be asking why this angry woman is trying to take him away from his family. My heart is pounding so hard I can barely think straight. Karen's face is red with anger, and she's yelling something about final warnings and legal action, but all I can focus on is my best friend being yanked away from me. What she doesn't know, what she's about to find out in the most shocking way possible, is that Max isn't just my pet. He's something much more important, something protected by federal law, something that's about to turn her world upside down and expose her for the heartless bully she really is. But how did we get to this crazy moment? Let me take you back to where this whole mess started, because trust me, you're not going to believe how this story unfolds. It all began 3 months ago when I moved into Sunny Meadows, a quiet little neighborhood that looked like something straight out of a magazine. Perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, and houses painted in approved colors that made everything look neat and tidy. I'm Jake Thompson, and I'm 24 years old. After finishing college, I finally saved up enough money to buy my first house, and I was so excited to start this new chapter of my life. I should probably tell you about Max first, because he's the real hero of this story. Max is a 3-year-old golden retriever with the most beautiful golden coat you've ever seen. His tail never stops wagging, and he has this amazing ability to sense when people are feeling sad or anxious. He came into my life during my darkest period, when I was struggling with severe anxiety and panic attacks that made it almost impossible to leave my house or function normally. You see, Max isn't just my best friend, he's my service animal. He's specially trained to help me when my anxiety gets so bad that I can't breathe, when panic attacks make me feel like the world is closing in around me. He can sense when an attack is coming before I even realize it myself, and he knows exactly how to help me calm down and feel safe again. Max has literally saved my life more times than I can count. When I first moved to Sunny Meadows, I was hopeful that this fresh start would be good for both of us. The neighborhood seemed peaceful, and I thought Max and I could finally have a normal life. I made sure to register with the HOA office and filled out all the paperwork, including the section about pets. I checked the box that said service animal, and even included a copy of Max's certification, thinking that would be the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. The first sign of trouble came just 2 weeks after we moved in. I was in my backyard with Max, throwing a tennis ball and watching him run around happily in the morning sunshine. The yard was fenced, completely private, and we weren't bothering anyone. Max was having the time of his life, his golden fur shining in the sunlight as he chased that bright yellow ball back and forth. That's when I heard the sharp tap-tap-tap of high heels on my sidewalk, followed by an angry voice calling out, "Excuse me. Excuse me." I turned around to see a woman in her 50s marching toward my fence. She was wearing a crisp white blouse, perfectly pressed pants, and had her gray hair pulled back so tightly it looked like it might hurt. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her eyes were cold and calculating behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Are you the new resident?" she demanded, not even bothering to introduce herself. "Yes, I'm Jake Thompson," I replied politely, walking over to the fence with Max trotting beside me. "Nice to meet you. I'm Karen Williams, president of the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association," she announced, like she was introducing royalty. "We need to discuss your dog situation immediately." Max, being the friendly guy he is, walked up to the fence with his tail wagging, probably hoping to make a new friend. Karen actually took a step backward, like he was some kind of dangerous wild animal instead of the sweetest dog you'd ever meet. "What seems to be the problem?" I asked, genuinely confused. I'd read through the HOA rules carefully, and I knew pets were allowed. "The problem," Karen said, pulling out a folder thick with papers, "is that your animal is in violation of multiple community standards. First, dogs over 40 pounds require special approval. Second, golden retrievers shed excessively, which creates a nuisance for neighbors. Third, I can see from here that you don't have the proper waste disposal system installed in your yard. I blinked at her, trying to process what she was saying. I'm sorry, but I filled out all the pet paperwork when I moved in. Max is a service animal, so he's protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And what do you mean about a waste disposal system? Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously. Service animal, she scoffed. Young man, I've been running this community for 8 years, and I know a pet when I see one. Real service animals are German shepherds or Labrador retrievers that guide blind people. Your golden retriever is clearly just a pet that you're trying to pass off as something special to avoid our rules. My heart started racing, and I felt that familiar tightness in my chest that meant anxiety was creeping in. Max immediately sensed the change in my mood and pressed against my leg, providing the comforting pressure that helped ground me. Ma'am, with all due respect, service animals aren't just for blind people, I explained as calmly as I could. Max is trained to help me with anxiety and panic disorders. I have all his documentation, and federal law protects his right to live here with me. Karen let out a harsh laugh that made Max's ears flatten against his head. Federal law. Honey, HOA covenants supersede feel-good federal suggestions. And I'm telling you right now that your oversized pet is going to cause problems in this community. Mark my words. She turned on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing there feeling shaken and confused. Max looked up at me with those wise brown eyes, and I could swear he understood that we just made our first enemy in Sunny Meadows. Over the next few weeks, things got progressively worse. Karen seemed to be watching my house constantly, and every few days, I'd find a new violation notice taped to my front door. Dog barking complaint, even though Max barely ever barked, and when he did, it was during normal daytime hours. Excessive pet waste in yard, because apparently having one small area where Max did his business was somehow a community hazard. Unleashed animal in common area, which referred to the time Max and I walked to the mailbox, with Max on his leash the entire time, but Karen claimed the mailbox area was a pet-free zone. Each notice came with threats about fines, legal action, and something ominously called animal removal procedures. I tried calling the HOA office to discuss these issues reasonably, but Karen was always in a meeting or dealing with more urgent community matters. The stress was getting to me. My anxiety, which had been well managed with Max's help, started getting worse again. I was losing sleep, worrying constantly about what Karen might do next. Max could sense my distress and rarely left my side, even following me from room to room in the house like he was afraid something bad might happen if he let me out of his sight. Then came the day that changed everything. I was coming home from my job at the local computer repair shop, looking forward to a quiet evening with Max. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Karen standing on my front porch with 2 other people I didn't recognize, a stern-looking man in a cheap suit and a woman with a clipboard who kept glancing nervously at Karen. My stomach dropped as I got out of my car. Max was nowhere to be seen, which was unusual because he always came running to greet me when I got home. The front door was standing wide open, and I could hear barking coming from inside the house. What's going on here? I called out, jogging toward the porch. Karen turned toward me with a satisfied smirk that made my blood run cold. Jake Thompson, meet Officer Rodriguez from the County Animal Control Division, and Mrs. Patterson from our HOA's legal compliance team. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. Sir, we've received multiple complaints about an aggressive animal at this address. We're here to conduct a welfare check. Aggressive animal? I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. Max has never hurt anyone in his life. He's the gentlest dog you could possibly meet. That's not what the reports say, Karen interjected, waving a thick stack of papers. Multiple noise complaints, property damage, threatening behavior toward other residents. This animal has become a menace to our peaceful community. I felt panic rising in my chest as I realized what was happening. Those reports are completely false. Max is a service animal. You can't just. Service animal or not, Officer Rodriguez interrupted gently, if there are legitimate safety concerns, we have to investigate. Mrs. Williams has provided extensive documentation. That's when I heard Max barking frantically from inside the house, and my heart nearly stopped. Did you go into my house? Did you go inside without my permission? Karen's smile grew wider. The HOA covenant gives us authority to enter any property when there's an immediate threat to community safety. We needed to secure the animal before someone got hurt. I pushed past them and ran into my house, following the sound of Max's distressed barking. I found him in my bedroom, cornered by two more people I didn't recognize. One was holding what looked like a catch pole, and Max was backed against the wall, trembling and whimpering in fear. "Get away from him!" I shouted, rushing to Max's side. He immediately pressed against me, his whole body shaking. I'd never seen him so terrified. "Sir, please step back," the person with the catch pole said. "We're trying to secure this animal safely. His name is Max, and he's my service dog." I protested, wrapping my arms around him protectively. "You have no right to be in my house, and you have no right to terrorize him like this." Karen appeared in the doorway behind me. "Jake, you can make this easy or you can make this hard. But this animal is coming with us today. You've had multiple warnings, multiple opportunities to comply with community standards, and you've ignored every single one." "I haven't ignored anything," I shot back. "I've explained repeatedly that Max is a service animal protected by federal law. And I've explained repeatedly that federal law doesn't override our community covenants," Karen replied coldly. "You signed an agreement when you bought this house, and that agreement gives us the authority to maintain community standards by any means necessary." I looked around at all these people crowding into my bedroom, trapping me and Max, and I felt completely overwhelmed. My anxiety was spiking so high I could barely think straight, and Max was picking up on my distress, making his own anxiety even worse. That's when Officer Rodriguez stepped into the room. "Look, folks, I need to see some documentation here. If this is really a service animal, there should be proper certification." "I have all his papers," I said quickly, grateful for any chance to prove Max's legitimacy. "They're in my office. Please, just let me show you." Karen crossed her arms. "Documentation can be faked. Anyone can print out official-looking papers from the internet these days." But Officer Rodriguez held up his hand. "Ma'am, I need to see the paperwork before we proceed. That's protocol." I carefully made my way to my office with Max pressed against my side, every step being watched by Karen and her team. My hands were shaking as I pulled out Max's certification folder, which contained his official service animal registration, his training certificates, and a letter from my doctor explaining my condition and Max's role in managing it. Officer Rodriguez examined the papers carefully while Karen looked over his shoulder, her expression growing more and more frustrated as she realized the documentation was completely legitimate. "These appear to be in order," Officer Rodriguez said slowly. "This is definitely a certified service animal." "Paperwork can be forged," Karen insisted, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "Ma'am, this includes verification numbers I can call to confirm," Officer Rodriguez replied. "And frankly, this animal doesn't show any signs of aggression. He seems scared, but he hasn't shown any threatening behavior toward any of us." I felt a tiny spark of hope, but it was quickly crushed by Karen's next words. "Fine," she said, her voice turning deadly quiet. "But service animal or not, this dog has violated multiple HOA covenants. Excessive noise, property damage, failure to maintain proper waste disposal systems. The documentation clearly states that continued violations will result in animal removal, regardless of any claimed special status." She pulled out yet another stack of papers and handed them to Officer Rodriguez. "These are all properly filed complaints with dates, times, and photographic evidence. This animal has had more than enough chances to comply with community standards." Officer Rodriguez looked through Karen's evidence, and his expression grew troubled. The photos showed Max's waste area in our backyard, some scattered leaves near our fence, and what appeared to be damage to a neighbor's flower bed that was supposedly caused by Max digging under our fence. "I need to ask," Officer Rodriguez said, turning to me. "Have you received official warnings about these violations?" "Yes, but they're all ridiculous. I protested. The barking complaints are false, Max barely barks at all. The waist area is completely normal for any dog owner. And he's never damaged anyone's property or dug under our fence. Karen smiled triumphantly. Officer Rodriguez, I think you can see that we're dealing with an irresponsible pet owner who refuses to take accountability for his animal's behavior. The HOA has been more than patient, but our residents deserve to live in peace. I watched in horror as Officer Rodriguez's expression shifted. The evidence Karen had presented, even though I knew it was exaggerated or outright fabricated, looked convincing on paper. And she had so much of it, dates, times, photos, witness statements from other residents. I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, Officer Rodriguez said reluctantly. Based on the documentation provided, there do appear to be legitimate violations that need to be addressed. Even service animals have to comply with basic community standards. But I can explain all of this. I insisted desperately. The photos don't tell the whole story. Max has never. The time for explanations has passed, Karen interrupted. This animal is being removed from the community today, pending a full investigation of these violations. And that's when it happened. Karen actually reached for the leash she brought with her and started approaching Max. My gentle, loving service dog, who had never hurt anyone in his life, backed away from her in terror. Come here, dog, Karen commanded harshly. We're going to settle this once and for all. Max looked up at me with those trusting brown eyes, and I saw something in them I'd never seen before, pure fear. Not just anxiety or nervousness, but the deep, primal fear of an animal who knows something terrible is about to happen to him. That's when my protective instincts kicked in completely, and I stepped between Karen and Max, my heart pounding with a combination of panic and rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. You are not taking my dog, I said, and my voice came out steadier and stronger than I felt. Karen's eyes flashed dangerously. Young man, you are interfering with official HOA business. Stand aside immediately, or I'll have Officer Rodriguez arrest you for obstruction. The room fell silent except for the sound of Max's anxious panting behind me. Officer Rodriguez looked uncomfortable, Mrs. Patterson was scribbling frantically on her clipboard, and Karen was staring at me with pure hatred in her eyes. And that's when everything exploded into the chaos that brought us to that moment in my front yard, with Karen actually trying to drag Max away from me while I watched my whole world falling apart. The chaos that erupted in my bedroom quickly spilled out into the hallway, then through my living room, and finally burst through my front door like a dam breaking. Karen was shouting orders at everyone, Officer Rodriguez was trying to maintain some kind of control over the situation, and poor Max was caught in the middle of it all, confused and terrified as this angry woman kept reaching for him with that leash. This is ridiculous. I yelled as we stumbled out onto my front lawn. You can't just steal someone's service animal. But Karen wasn't listening to reason anymore. Her face was red with fury, and she had this wild look in her eyes like she'd completely lost control. This animal is coming with us right now, she screamed, lunging forward with the leash. I don't care what your fake papers say. That's when Max did something that broke my heart into a million pieces. My brave, loyal service dog, the same dog who had helped me through countless panic attacks, who had never shown fear in the face of anything, let out a terrified whimper and tried to hide behind my legs. His whole body was shaking, and I could feel his panic feeding into my own anxiety until I thought I might collapse right there on my lawn. Officer Rodriguez stepped between us, holding up his hands. Everyone needs to calm down right now. Mrs. Williams, please step back and let me handle this situation properly. But Karen pushed right past him, her eyes locked on Max like he was some kind of criminal she was determined to capture. I am handling this situation. This community has rules, and this irresponsible pet owner thinks he's above them. She made another grab for Max, and that's when my protective instincts took over completely. I dropped to my knees and wrapped my arms around my terrified dog, shielding him with my own body. If you want to take him, you'll have to go through me first, I said, and I meant every word. The neighborhood had started to take notice of the commotion. I could see faces appearing in windows, people stepping out onto their porches to see what all the shouting was about. Mrs. Chen from next door was standing on her front steps with a concerned expression, and Mr. Rodriguez, no relation to the officer, from across the street was walking over with his phone in his hand like he was ready to call for backup. Karen seemed to realize she had an audience, and instead of calming down, it just made her more determined to prove she was in control. "Fine," she declared loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "If you want to make this a public spectacle, that's exactly what we'll do." She marched over to her car, which was parked right in front of my house, and popped open the trunk. To my absolute horror, she pulled out what looked like a professional animal carrier, the kind used to transport dogs to the vet. She'd come prepared for this. She'd actually planned to take Max away from me. "Mrs. Williams," Officer Rodriguez said, his voice getting stern now. "I think we need to slow this whole process down. There are proper procedures for this kind of thing." "The proper procedure," Karen snapped, dragging the carrier across my lawn, "is removing problem animals from our community before they become a danger to residents. And that's exactly what I'm going to do." That's when something beautiful and unexpected happened. Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor who I'd only spoken to a few times since moving in, came marching across her yard with fire in her eyes. "Karen Williams, what in the world do you think you're doing to that poor boy and his dog?" she demanded, positioning herself right next to me and Max. Karen turned on her with that same cold fury. "Helen, this doesn't concern you. Please return to your property immediately." "Like hell it doesn't concern me," Mrs. Chen shot back, and I was amazed to hear this sweet little old lady using language like that. "I've been watching this young man and his beautiful dog for months, and they've never caused a single problem. Max is the sweetest, quietest dog in this entire neighborhood." "You don't understand the situation, Helen," Karen said through gritted teeth. "This animal has multiple violations." "The only violation I see," Mrs. Chen interrupted, "is you terrorizing a disabled young man and his service animal." I felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost brought tears to my eyes. Mrs. Chen had noticed that Max was a service animal, even when the so-called HOA president refused to acknowledge it. More neighbors were gathering now. Mr. Rodriguez had made it across the street and was standing behind Mrs. Chen like backup. The Johnsons from 2 houses down were on their front lawn, whispering to each other and pointing at Karen's animal carrier with shocked expressions. Karen seemed to realize she was losing control of the narrative, which just made her more desperate and dangerous. "I don't care how many of you want to interfere," she announced. "HOA bylaws are clear, and this animal is being removed today." She opened the carrier and started approaching us again, and Max pressed even closer against me, trembling so hard I could feel it through my whole body. My own anxiety was spiking to dangerous levels, the kind of panic attack that used to leave me unable to function for hours before Max came into my life. But Max, even in his own terror, was still trying to do his job. I felt him pressing against my chest in that specific way he'd been trained to do, applying the deep pressure that helped ground me during panic attacks. Even while this woman was trying to take him away from me, my loyal service dog was still trying to take care of me. That's when Mr. Rodriguez spoke up, and his voice carried the kind of authority that made everyone stop what they were doing. "Karen, I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, and I've never seen you act like this before. What's really going on here?" Karen whirled around to face him. "What's going on, Robert, is that I'm trying to maintain the property values and quality of life that we all moved here for. This irresponsible pet owner thinks his fake service animal gives him the right to ignore every single community standard." "Fake service animal?" Mrs. Chen repeated, her voice rising with indignation. "Are you completely out of your mind? That dog helps Jake with his anxiety. I've seen it with my own eyes. Anyone can claim their pet is a service animal these days," Karen shot back. "You just print out some official-looking papers from the internet, and suddenly your badly trained mutt becomes untouchable." That's when Officer Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing this whole exchange, stepped forward with a very serious expression on his face. "Mrs. Williams, I need to inform you that making false statements about service animals is actually a crime. And after reviewing Mr. Thompson's documentation more carefully, I can confirm that this is absolutely a legitimate, federally protected service animal." Karen's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "I called the verification numbers while you all were," discussing things, Officer Rodriguez explained. This dog's certification is completely authentic. Max is a registered psychiatric service animal trained by Healing Paws Service Dogs, one of the most reputable organizations in the country. His training records, health records, and federal registration are all properly filed and up to date. The neighborhood fell silent except for the sound of birds chirping in the distance and Max's anxious panting. Karen stood there holding that animal carrier, looking like someone had just told her the world was flat. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I've filed dozens of legitimate complaints." "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez continued, "I also need to inform you that interfering with a service animal's duties is a federal offense. And attempting to remove a service animal from its handler can result in serious criminal charges." Karen's grip on the animal carrier loosened, and it slipped from her hands, clattering onto my lawn. But the violations, the documentation." "What violations?" Mrs. Chen demanded. "I live right next door, and I can tell you for a fact that Max has never barked excessively, never damaged anyone's property, and never caused any problems whatsoever." Mr. Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "Same here. And I keep pretty detailed notes about neighborhood activities for my own HOA concerns. I've never witnessed any of the behaviors described in your reports, Karen." More neighbors were speaking up now, and what I heard filled my heart with a warmth I hadn't felt in months. "Max is the sweetest dog I've ever met," called out Mrs. Johnson. "My kids love seeing him on their walks. He helped me when I fell on the sidewalk last month," added Mr. Peterson from the corner house. "Stayed right with me and kept me calm until help arrived." "I've been dealing with my own anxiety since my husband passed," said Mrs. Rodriguez. "Watching how Max takes care of Jake has been an inspiration to me." Karen looked around at all these neighbors, her own community members, speaking up in defense of Max and me, and I could see something crumbling in her expression. The righteous anger was fading, replaced by confusion and something that looked almost like shame. "I don't understand," she said weakly. "The complaints, someone filed all these complaints." Officer Rodriguez pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "Mrs. Williams, I just checked our database. Every single complaint about this address came from the same person. They all came from you." The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Karen stared at the phone screen, then at Officer Rodriguez, then at all the neighbors gathered around us. "That can't be right," she stammered. "I was reporting complaints from other residents." "Ma'am, our system tracks the source of every complaint. These all originated from your phone number and email address. There are no reports from any other residents." Mrs. Chen stepped closer to Karen, and her voice was gentler now but still firm. "Karen, honey, what's really going on here? This isn't like you. You've been a good neighbor for years. Why are you targeting this young man and his service dog?" Karen looked around at all the faces staring at her, neighbors she'd known for years, people she'd worked with on community projects, folks she'd considered friends. And suddenly, she just broke down. I don't know," she whispered, sinking down onto the curb like all the fight had gone out of her. "Ever since my divorce, ever since Tom moved out. I just feel so angry all the time. And when Jake moved in with his perfect house and his perfect dog, living this perfect life." She buried her face in her hands, and when she looked up, there were tears streaming down her cheeks. "I've been so miserable, and it felt good to have someone to blame for it. Someone to focus all this anger on. But listening to all of you, seeing how kind and supportive you all are, I realize what a terrible person I've become." The neighborhood fell quiet again, but this time it wasn't the tense silence of conflict. It was the thoughtful quiet of people trying to understand and process what they'd just heard. Mrs. Chen walked over and sat down on the curb next to Karen. "Honey, why didn't you tell us you were struggling? We're all neighbors here. We could have helped. Because I was supposed to be the strong one." Karen sobbed. "I was the HOA president. I was supposed to have everything under control. I couldn't let anyone see that my life was falling apart." I looked down at Max, who was still pressed against my side but had stopped trembling. His natural empathy was kicking in, and I could see him watching Karen with those wise, compassionate eyes that seemed to understand pain when he saw it. "Max," I said softly, "it's okay, boy. She's hurting, not angry." And then something amazing happened. Max, my gentle service dog who had every reason to be afraid of this woman who just tried to take him away from me, slowly walked over to where Karen was sitting and laid his golden head on her knee. Karen looked down at him in shock, tears still streaming down her face. Why is he being nice to me? After everything I just did to him? Because that's who he is, I said, walking over to join them. Max can sense when someone is in pain, and he wants to help. That's what he was trained for. Karen gently placed her hand on Max's head, and I watched as some of the tension left her shoulders. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "And I almost took him away from you for no good reason." "You were hurting," I said, surprising myself with how understanding I sounded. "Hurt people sometimes hurt other people. I know something about that." Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Williams, I need to address the legal issues here. Technically, you've committed several violations of federal law regarding service animals." Karen's face went white with panic. "Am I going to jail?" "That depends," Officer Rodriguez said, looking at me. "Mr. Thompson, do you want to press charges?" Everyone looked at me, waiting for my answer. Karen was staring at me with terrified eyes, probably expecting me to demand the full force of the law come down on her. Max was still resting his head on her knee, and she was unconsciously stroking his fur like it was comforting her. I thought about everything that had happened, the months of harassment, the fear, the stress that had made my anxiety so much worse. I thought about that terrifying moment when I thought I might actually lose Max, my lifeline, my best friend. But then I looked at this broken woman sitting on my curb, crying over a dog who was showing her more kindness than she'd shown us, and I realized something important. "No," I said. "I don't want to press charges." Karen looked up at me in shock. "What?" "I don't want to press charges," I repeated. "But I do want something else." "Anything," Karen said quickly. "I'll do anything to make this right." "I want you to get help," I said. "Real help. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes to deal with what you're going through. Because this isn't really about Max or me or HOA rules. This is about you being in pain and not knowing how to handle it." Mrs. Chen smiled at me with such warmth that it felt like a hug. "That's very wise, Jake. And very kind. And," I continued, "I want you to use your position as HOA president to make sure this never happens to anyone else. No more harassment of people with disabilities. No more made-up violations. No more using your power to make other people as miserable as you've been feeling." Karen nodded through her tears. "I promise. I swear to you, I'll never do anything like this again." Officer Rodriguez looked satisfied with this resolution. "I'll still need to file a report about this incident, Mrs. Williams, but given Mr. Thompson's decision not to press charges and your willingness to seek help, I think we can consider this matter closed from a legal standpoint." As Officer Rodriguez packed up his things and the crowd of neighbors began to disperse, something beautiful started happening. Instead of just going back to their houses and forgetting about the whole thing, people lingered. Mrs. Chen invited Karen over for tea and a long talk. Mr. Rodriguez offered to help me install some better lighting in my backyard, just because he thought it would be a nice improvement. The Johnsons mentioned that they'd love to have Max and me over for a barbecue sometime. It was like this crisis had somehow brought the whole neighborhood together instead of driving us apart. Karen stood up from the curb, looking emotionally drained but somehow lighter than she had all afternoon. "Jake, I know I don't deserve it, but could you ever forgive me?" I looked down at Max, who had returned to my side and was looking up at me with those trusting brown eyes. "Max already has," I said. "And if he can forgive you, then so can I." Karen smiled through her tears, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from her. "He really is an amazing dog, isn't he?" "The best," I agreed, scratching behind Max's ears. "He's taught me more about compassion and forgiveness than I ever thought possible." As the sun started setting over sunny meadows, I realized that this whole terrible experience had actually led to something wonderful. I'd found out that my neighbors weren't just people who lived near me, they were a real community, ready to stand up for each other when it mattered. Karen had learned that her pain didn't give her the right to hurt others, but that asking for help was okay, and that healing was possible. And Max? Well, Max had done what he did best, he'd helped heal not just my anxiety, but an entire neighborhood's fear and anger, simply by being his loving, empathetic self. 3 months later, Sunny Meadows had become everything I'd hoped it would be when I first moved in. Karen had stepped down as HOA president but stayed involved as a volunteer, focusing her energy on creating programs to help residents going through difficult times. She'd started therapy and was working hard to become the kind of neighbor she wanted to be. Mrs. Chen and I had become close friends, and she often stopped by just to spend time with Max, who seemed to sense that she was sometimes lonely and always made sure to give her extra attention. The whole neighborhood had embraced us, and Max had become something of a local celebrity, not as that problem dog, but as that amazing service dog who helps everyone feel better. Most importantly, I'd learned that even in the darkest moments, when everything seems hopeless and cruel people seem to have all the power, there are always good people willing to stand up and do the right thing. Sometimes you just have to wait for them to find their courage. And sometimes, all it takes is one gentle, loving dog to remind everyone what really matters, treating each other with kindness, understanding that we're all fighting battles others can't see, and never underestimating the healing power of compassion. Max is lying at my feet as I finish telling this story, his tail thumping against the floor every time I look down at him. He doesn't know he's a hero, he just knows he's doing the job he was trained for, helping his human and anyone else who needs it. But I know the truth. In a world that can sometimes feel cruel and divided, Max represents everything good about love, loyalty, and never giving up on people, even when they've given you every reason to. That's the real lesson of our story. Sometimes the best way to change someone's heart is not with anger or punishment, but with the simple, powerful act of showing them kindness they don't deserve but desperately need. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of compassion in our daily lives, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. Because in a world where it's easy to respond to cruelty with more cruelty, choosing kindness is always the bravest and most powerful thing you can do.